Thank you. It's always nice when somebody pronounces your name correctly as you're getting on the stage. So I'm Peter Soparkar, the Chief Operating Officer of Adverum. And at this conference over the last couple days, we've been talking a lot about some of the challenges that we see in gene therapy. Manufacturing, data interpretation, evolving regulatory landscape, and all of that is non-trivial. But I'm excited to be able to be here and talk to you about one of our industry's wins, Ixo-vec, which is our lead product candidate. So Adverum is a gene therapy company focused on large indications in the eye. Our lead program is in wet AMD, so I mentioned it's Ixo-vec, and I'm going to be talking about that today. Wet AMD is a quickly moving disease in the eye. It's caused by a buildup of fluid in the back of the eye, and that impacts your vision, preventing patients from being able to see. It is the leading cause of blindness in people over 65. Let me talk to you a little bit about what AMD is like, what it's like to have wet AMD. So there are treatments today. The treatment paradigm is a regular bolus injection. So every 4 to 6 weeks, if you have wet AMD in the United States, approximately, you are going into your physician's office, getting an injection into your eye that has wet AMD. And that's usually a full-day experience. These are patients generally in their 70s and 80s. If any of you have been to those clinics, you know these are large clinics, right? These physicians can be treating 70, 80, 90 patients a day. You go in, it's usually about 4 hours. You need to have a caregiver often bringing you in, they're with you, and then they have to take you home. If you are unfortunate enough to have bilateral disease, which roughly 40% of patients develop within the first 3 years of being diagnosed with wet AMD in your first eye, that means you're going in every 2 to 3 weeks. And you have to think about what the impact of that on your life and on the life of your caregivers and your family. And these are patients that are having to structure their entire life around these treatments. So not surprisingly, when you talk to physicians about what the biggest unmet need is, it's all really around the same idea, which they're looking for a treatment that allows patients to go perpetually without having to come back in. So really all around the same concept, right? Longer duration, better care of the fluid. Just to give you a sense of scale, there are 20 million people with wet AMD in the world today, 1.5 million in the United States, and it's estimated that it'll be 29 million by 2040. It is growing as the world's population ages. Whoop. So as I mentioned, there's a standard of care, and in the clinic it performs okay. You begin to see a little bit of a taper. So these patients, they come in, they get injected, and their BCVA, which is how you measure vision, improves substantially. But then even in the clinic, you start to see the taper. But then in real world, which is what ultimately we really care about, because fundamentally that's why we're here, is to see what is to serve patients in their real lives, you see a dramatic decline in BCVA over the first 5 years. Now, on average, these are patients that live 10 to 12 years. So you're talking about a substantial decrease in their vision over time. But that's only for patients that stay on treatment. And if you think about roughly 20 to 50% of patients stop treatment, that's a substantial change in their vision over time as well. And this is real world outcomes, and this is really what we care about. So there have been recent developments. There are other programs coming to market, but fundamentally, they're all really the same paradigm. They might be shifting by 1 or 2 weeks for some patients, but the underlying curves stay the same. You still see that taper in the clinic, and we expect to see the same in real-world outcomes. So I'm going to talk to you for a minute about OPTIC, which was our phase 1/2 study. We dosed 2 doses. We dosed at 6E11 and 2E11. The patient population is roughly what you see with wet AMD. These were patients in their 70s and 80s. And these are what we consider frequent flyers. So these are patients getting roughly 10 injections per year. So again, painting that image for you, these patients are going into the office and getting that injection in their eye almost every month. So this is my favorite slide that I get to show. It's actually now my second favorite. I'll show you my favorite shortly. So in OPTIC, what we saw, we were able to take protein expression levels from the front of the eye at week 12. And the exciting part about this slide is what you see is what we saw at week 12 is what we saw out to 3 years. And this is data that we've shown so far. We anticipate showing additional data in a couple weeks at AAO. Our sentinel patient is now out almost at 5 years. And this is kind of incredible. Now, this obviously is a biomarker for what we really care about, which is supplemental injections. Do these patients need additional injections over time? But it's a very useful marker for us to be able to track because it's easy to see early on. The other thing that obviously we care about even more is BCVA, right? What happens to that patient's vision? The biomarker's nice, but is the patient's vision doing well? So these are patients that were highly experienced, and exactly what we hoped happened, right? These patients' vision, you can see over the 2-year period of the study, stayed completely flat. Perhaps equally important, CST, which is a measure at the back of the eye, also stayed flat. And I'll come back to CST in a minute. So talking about safety a little bit, one of the things that we saw for 2E11, one of the things that we learned is that the peak period of immunogenicity in the eye after injection is 6 to 8 weeks. Now, we did not know that going in, but that's one of the things that we learned coming out of OPTIC. Unfortunately, in OPTIC, we provided steroid prophylaxis for a suboptimal period. So in one cohort, you can see these tiny little arrows in the bottom left. We provided oral prednisone for 13 days, and in the other cohort, we provided drops for 6 weeks. That meant that we were either tapering down or taking patients off completely during their period of peak immunogenicity. That is a key learning for our next trial. But even with that, 40% of patients at our 2E11 dose did not require any additional prophylaxis. And so I'd come back to CST. So one of the things that we've been seeing the last couple of years is quite a bit of research around the importance of CST fluctuation on impacting vision. So one of the theories out there right now, which is getting a lot of legs, is that it's not just that patients aren't receiving enough anti-VEGF in their bolus injections. It's actually the constant bolus injections themselves and the increase in shrinking of fluid in the back of the eye, causing damage to those cells that are also impacting vision. So of course, we show you a lot of data, but for me, it's really important to show you specific examples, because each of these data points represents a patient in their life and what they are actually experiencing. So this is a 90-year-old female. You can see in her CST, there's a huge spike. That was a visit that she had missed. So you see this rapid increase in fluid. 9 injections in the prior year. After 1 injection of Ixo-vec, out past 100 weeks, no additional injections. And you see that beautiful flat curve at the back of the eye. Another patient, 81-year-old male. You see in the images this beautiful Gothic arch with these nice columns and everything. That's exactly what you don't want in the back of your eye. Right, so he gets, and even though he'd received 9 injections in the prior year, you see his CST is still well above, close to 700, right? So this is somebody even receiving close to the maximum amount that he could be getting, and he's still not getting the full impact. 1 injection with Ixo-vec, and out to 2 years, it's both completely flat and no additional injections, and he has that beautiful flat back of the eye. So I'm going to skip through some slides because I don't have enough time and I'm probably not talking fast enough. But remember, we talked about the critical unmet need, Ixo-vec really works to solve for that. And at the 2E11 dose, what we saw in OPTIC, where patients overall got an 80%, more than 80% reduction in need for additional injections, and over 50% of patients were completely injection-free. So going into LUNA, which is our phase 2 trial, we had two objectives. One was determine the optimal dose, and two was to determine the best prophylactic regimen. Now, on the optimal dose side, I'll come back to that in a second. We were very satisfied with what we saw, particularly at the 2E11 dose in OPTIC. But we do know that inflammation in ocular gene therapy is correlated with dose. That sounds obvious now as I say it. The more virus you inject in your eye, the more likely you are to have an immune response. But don't lose sight of the fact that we were very early in this. So 5 years ago, when we started our trial, that wasn't necessarily obvious. But we went back and we looked at our NHP model, and we also ran another part of the NHP model and looked at could we dose down. Because if you look at on the left side, left side, you see essentially a flat dose response over 3 logs, which is kind of incredible. So if you think about your gene therapy sigmoidal curve, we believe strongly that we're still in the flat part of that curve. However, on the right side, you see that it is the inflammation, so your safety signal is dose dependent. It's almost a straight line correlation. So because of that, we took a look at the 6E10 human equivalent dose and just gave us a lot of confidence that we could bring that forward into our phase 2. Our phase 2 trial, LUNA, multi-center, double-masked, randomized parallel group phase 2 study. What that means is it is masked as to dose for the patients and the physicians. It's largely the same sites that we used in OPTIC with a handful of other sites, and we announced it was fully enrolled in August. A couple weeks ago, we released preliminary data, which I'll come to in a second, which is now my favorite slide. A little bit more color on this. So in addition to looking at the two doses, we are looking at 4 prophylactic regimens with each of those doses. So 2 local steroid options, and then those 2 with oral on top to determine if there's a systemic component to the inflammation we saw in OPTIC. Not yet my favorite slide, but very cool. 2 of the things that we wanted to understand with this initial data release was whether the 2 doses that we saw, pulling that first protein expression, remember that first slide I showed you with the lines that stretched out to 3 years, is for our 6E10 and 2E11 dose, this preliminary data, do we see this protein expression overlapping? So you see the pinkish and then pinkish purple dots. Those are the 2 doses, our 6E10 and our 2E11. Now, we haven't disclosed which is which because the trial's masked and we don't want to unmask it. But you can see that they completely overlap. So that was question 1. The second question that we were hoping to be able to answer with this preliminary data cut is, does it overlap with the protein expression that we saw in OPTIC with our 2E11 dose? And in fact, as you can see, that also overlaps. So that's obviously extremely exciting for us. And when we look at this slide, which is my new favorite slide, it's exciting because we think that what you see at the beginning is what we're going to be seeing out 2-3 years, possibly for the life of the patient. So fundamentally, 2E11, 6E10 doses delivered similar aflibercept expression levels so far, and we believe that's within the therapeutically active range. I'm speaking faster now because I see I'm really running out of time. But we are pleased with the Fast Track designation in the United States. We are extremely excited to have PRIME designation in Europe. Those of you who are in the ocular space know that Wiley Chambers at the FDA is always willing to engage with sponsors and have informal conversation. That's not always as true with EMA. The PRIME designation with EMA allows us to have informal and formal conversation on a running basis with EMA and the rapporteurs that they assign to us. So they've assigned a clinical and a CMC rapporteur, which the reason we're so excited about it is that we believe pretty strongly that allows us to de-risk a lot of the regulatory engagement. We also have ILAP with MHRA, which of course is also helpful. Out of time, so I'll just tell you that we will be sharing additional LUNA data. As I mentioned, we're fully enrolled in August. We'll be sharing additional efficacy and safety data in the next quarter, 26-week and 52-week data next year. Thank you very much.